The Santa Fe Trail had brought American goods and some Americans to New Mexico beginning in the 1820s. Once Mexico declared its independence from Spain, there was a liberalization in trade. Under Spanish rule, foreigners could not participate in the trade in the empire, including New Mexico.
Professor Noel Pugach here tells the story of Jews in the state. As he begins, he's talking about Charles Elfeld.
Star family. They seed him, give him supplies and the like in Taos, and he joins a man by the name of Letcher. He probably was not Jewish. In Taos. Taos had somewhat of a mercantile community, but it becomes a backwater. It's off the beaten path. It's far from the Santa Fe Trail, and then when the railroad comes, there's no question, Taos becomes a backwater. Maybe a nice tourist place and the like, but it's out of the loop as far as trade is concerned. So with 100 mules, Letcher and Elfeld transport all their inventory to Santa Fe. Actually, first to Las Vegas, not to Santa Fe, excuse me, Las Vegas. And they set up their enterprises in Las Vegas. Eventually, Elfeld will buy out Letcher, and he becomes the dominant merchant in Las Vegas. There are others, Rosenwalds come in, and Boothner's and the like, but Charles Elfeld, who has been called by William Parrish, the first real mercantile capitalist in New Mexico. He is the leading figure. And his brothers join him also. And then Elfeld moves into wholesaling. He really didn't want to, but he was forced to, the various business pressures. He started to supply various merchants, and then in order to carry on that business and extend his reach throughout New Mexico, as he did, he went into wholesaling. But his heart was always in retailing, actually. He was not a very good administrator, and he didn't know how to manage people very well. But that changes when he brings in as to work for him a man by the name of Max Nordhaus. Nordhaus was married, Elfeld married into the Nordhaus family, Adele, and and eventually Max is brought over to help Charles. Max is much more of an administrator, much more able to delegate authority. Charles was not very good at that. He was a genius in seeing opportunities and the like, bold and so forth, but Nordhaus was certainly the better administrator. And he would really oversee the rapid expansion of the wholesale side of the Elfeld enterprises. Charles Elfeld and Company, and brothers, both Charles Elfeld brothers, and eventually they would incorporate as well. Needs of capital and the like, and he had to essentially pay off Nordhaus for all his services. He kept him on a rather small salary, and finally Nordhaus married, and he insisted on getting a share of the business, and he did. He eventually got 25% of the business. Nordhaus would also move from Las Vegas to Albuquerque. Albuquerque emerges as the great commercial center, banking center of the territory. It supersedes Las Vegas. Now, Las Vegas boomed with the coming of the railroad in 1879. Railroad then comes to Albuquerque. Albuquerque is better situated to drain the business of the territory. And so by World War One, Albuquerque is the largest city and the most important commercial banking center of New Mexico, and Las Vegas declines. Meanwhile, Santa Fe had declined as a center of business. The railroad did not enter Santa Fe originally, the Santa Fe Railroad, in spite of the name. And the local merchants had to pay for a spur to be built from Lamy, or Lamy, New Mexico, to bring some goods into Santa Fe. But Santa Fe lost its role as the major commercial center that it began. Interestingly, thanks to a later group of Jewish immigrants, some German and some now from Eastern Europe, the Santa Fe Plaza is revived. And so beginning in the 1890s, and especially right before World War I, a number of Jewish merchants enter Santa Fe, and they revive the plaza as the center of commercial life in Santa Fe. So Santa Fe gets a new lease on life. It also benefits when it becomes a state. Territorial legislature always met the center of the capital of New Mexico was always Santa Fe. But the creation of the statehood helps to enlarge the government, and it becomes more and more a center of government. And then in the 1920s, there's a new boom thanks to tourism. Fred Harvey and others will bring people to New Mexico, and one of the outstanding places is Santa Fe. And Santa Fe also, by this time, becomes a center for the arts, as well as Taos also. And so the role of the arts is crucial in the rebirth of Santa Fe, and the fact that it's now the state capital. And so, and tourism, of course, helps to make Santa Fe. And it still performs those roles today. It's not much of a manufacturing center. But the real center of commercial activity now comes to Albuquerque. And Jews play a very important role in the creation of the downtown business district. And the story is that the railroad comes to Albuquerque in 1880, and the valley, old Albuquerque, Old Town, did not want it, apparently, didn't want it very much, but also there was worry about flooding. Santa Fe was worried about flooding. It had really picked Bernalillo to be a major transit point for the railroad, with rail yards and the like, and that's really what Albuquerque would benefit from. It employed so many people, the rail yards, where trains were repaired and things like that and serviced. And anyway, Bernalillo was to be it, but a couple of the big landowners got greedy, and the Santa Fe Railroad refused to pay their price, and the result, they created on the barren mesa, really, New Albuquerque, all right? It was known as Newtown at first, and then it becomes known as Albuquerque. Business began in Old Town, but by the end of the 19th century, a number of the merchants drifted into Newtown. There was the railroad, okay? That was very important. And a key figure in this was a man by the name of Kaufmann Mandel. Kaufmann Mandel was a German Jewish immigrant, came to New York. Was an adventurer. He had to get it out of his system, so he joined a trading venture in the west coast of Africa for a while. And then he comes back to New York and he goes into the import-export business, becomes quite successful, quite wealthy. He fights for the Union in the Civil War. He rises to the rank of major. While he's in Mississippi, he meets a Jewish woman, the daughter of a merchant in the small town in Mississippi, and they fall in love, and eventually they will marry. And for a while, to be close to her family, he's unwelcome when after the war as a merchant in town. He goes to work for his father-in-law. Not because he's Jewish, but because he's a Yankee. So he shifts to New Orleans, but he recognizes New York as the business center of the United States, so he goes back to New York. In 1880, however, he comes out west, and he comes to Albuquerque soon after the railroad arrives, and he has a vision that Albuquerque will become a great city. And he shows his faith by buying lots in really barren on the mesa. It's about downtown Albuquerque. It's north of Lomas between 4th and 6th. I think he bought land there as to build homes, residential area. And so he goes back to New York. And he sends out his son-in-law, his future son-in-law, who marries his daughter, he says, this is a place of opportunity, go there, but also look over my interests, his real estate interests. And he does. And that's Mike Mandel. Michael Mandel, who goes into business here, hardware and so forth, and he will become the 6th mayor of Albuquerque, the second Jew. Jaffa was the first Jewish mayor of Albuquerque in 1885, and Mandel, it's often incorrect that he was the second. No, he wasn't. They were one-year terms. He was elected in 1890, and so he's the second Jewish mayor of Albuquerque, and the last. Never again was there a Jew who was mayor of Albuquerque. Interestingly. He occupied other positions, but never mayor. And he is part of this group of merchants who create downtown Albuquerque, the business district. And there are several families that are very prominent, particularly 4 interrelated Alsatian Jewish families. The Weilers, the Mandels were from Alsace, the Benjamins, and the Dreyfuses. And they establish some of the major retail establishments in Albuquerque, downtown Albuquerque. Mandel Dreyfus, which was probably for a while the premier place to buy clothing, and others. And they're joined by a whole variety of people, Jews, who established their businesses downtown between, first, where the railroad is, and 4th and 5th, northwest, southwest. Both the block between 2nd and 3rd consisted almost entirely of Jewish merchants, interestingly. And then they start pushing further west, and the connections with Old Town grow. But Albuquerque is incorporated as a separate city than Old Town, and eventually, later on, Old Town joins Albuquerque. So that provides a context. Meanwhile, the Jewish population grows, and Jewish institutions begin. The first synagogue in New Mexico was Congregation Montefiore in Las Vegas. And Las Vegas was the largest Jewish community for a number of years. The second major institution, was B'nai B'rith Lodge in Albuquerque, 336. B'nai B'rith Lodge is established also in Las Vegas. Interestingly, no synagogue is established in Santa Fe until the 1950s, 1953. It's the city different. And now there were attempts to organize one. Services were held in homes for a number of years. The first bar mitzvah was held in, I think, the 1880s in a home in Santa Fe. But the institutional creation of institutions was very, very weak in Santa Fe. Congregation Albert, a second synagogue established in Albuquerque in 1896. Santa Fe will not even have a Jewish cemetery. One is established in Albuquerque, one is established in Las Vegas, but not in Santa Fe. To this day, well, there's a section that has become the Jewish section, but no dedicated Jewish cemetery as Albuquerque has at Fairlawn. And as Las Vegas has, part of the cemetery is marked off as the Jewish cemetery, as you know. So the institutions were limited, but they start growing. A major change occurs with the influx of East European Jews into Albuquerque in particular by the 1920s, and they will establish the second synagogue in town, and that is B'nai Israel. Originally it was considered Orthodox, but then it will join the conservative movement. And Hadassah is formed in Albuquerque just when, I'm not sure. It takes really the influx of Jews into Albuquerque after the war, thanks to the labs and the like, when Albuquerque becomes the center of the atomic energy industry and the like, and scientists and engineers come in, many of them Jews. They come from the East Coast, the Midwest, and they want Jewish institutions. And they will establish them. The old German Jewish population didn't want it. It was okay to have a synagogue and to go to temple Friday night and Saturday morning and observe the holidays, but they did not want to separate themselves from the rest of the community. Their relationships were very good. So the idea of a Jewish lecture series was abhorrent. A Jewish day camp was abhorrent to them. That causes separation. But the new people coming in, beginning in the 50s and 60s, and I'm part of that group, said, we want a Jewish day camp. We want maybe a day school. We want a Jewish lecture series. And eventually they won out. They will change the shape of Albuquerque. The original Jewish community was non-Zionist, if not anti-Zionist. That was the old Reform attitude. But that changes. And Albuquerque, really, the Albuquerque Jewish community joins the rest of America, Jewish America, and has the similar outlook and institutions and so forth.